as it's happening. So there is a definite synergy, and yes, I love to use the word synergy in any speech that I give. There is a definite synergy there between two agencies, but we are not the same, and we get that a whole lot. Okay. I think that's the, okay, yes, we are in. So this is an incredibly prettied up picture of the Public Safety Center. If you've not been to the Public Safety Center, we're right across the way. And I do want to encourage anyone who might be interested to give us a call and set up an appointment to come sit in with a dispatcher. Like, we always welcome that. A lot of times police officers and sheriff's deputies will do ride-alongs. This is our version of ride-alongs, and we encourage you guys, particularly as Greene County employees, if you'd be interested just to kind of see what it's all about, give us a call. We'll do a quick setup for you, have you come over for a couple hours, plug in with a dispatcher, and just get a taste of what it's like. And I think what you'll find that 911 is far removed from what you see on TV. It's a whole lot more of the somebody's parked in my yard, how am I supposed to get around this eyesore type? We get a lot of that type of stuff. So most of the calls we get aren't the exciting calls. Okay, so like most folks, we have a mission statement. And that is our mission statement. And I know that a lot of times mission statements make people's eyes roll. And, you know, we had to have a mission statement, so here it is. But we truly do live by this mission statement. And we remember that we are providing a service for our community when they are at their most vulnerable, their most raw, their most anguished. And we have to respect that situation that we find ourselves in with people, certainly citizens of our county. I'll never forget the child calls that you take. Those are the ones that tend to really stick with our folks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about first responder stress and 911 as first responder. There's a movement currently, it's been going on for a few years, to try and get us recognized governmentally as first responders, because 911 truly is the very first responder. A lot of people might say, well, you're not on scene. I can tell you that when you take a call from a parent whose child isn't breathing, or if they find the child floating in a pool, to be witness to and party to that degree of naked, raw anguish. I don't care who you are. I don't care how long you've done it. And I don't care what training you've had. It's going to hit you here. There's a critical incident stress component that comes with all public safety, 911 certainly among them. So we are dealing with people oftentimes in those situations, and my folks are dealing with what comes from that. And I'll talk a little bit today about how we're dealing with stress over there and the things that we're doing to mitigate that stress. When I was a new dispatcher and I started in 1994, things were significantly different back then. Of course, I would take the horse and buggy to work. And I would go before work and pump some water in Ma's well house. By the way, a lot of times when I teach public speaking at Missouri State on the side too, and I always kind of glance through the crowd when I try to be funny, and I always lock in on the one person, and I've already found one. I'm not going to point out who it is. Every time I try to be funny, that does this. Please, I've got a couple meetings. Could you? In any event, we do, I digress, we do embrace our mission statement and we live our mission statement. And I encourage you, if you have a mission statement in your department that's specific to you, read it and take it to heart and don't eye roll it, because they do mean something. And we embrace ours certainly every day that we serve our citizens. Okay. Clickety click. Not working. Aha. Okay. So let's talk about the base role at 911. So when you start at 911, you're going to be trained to do a bunch of different things. The base role is a 911 telecommunicator or call taker. So that's the first thing we're going to train you on when you come to 911. That training takes about 200 hours. We have an excellent training program. The training program will train you as a call taker, as a police dispatcher, as a fire dispatcher, as a sheriff and municipalities dispatcher, and as what we call an administrative radio dispatcher. And each one of those has its own set of benchmarks. Each one of those has its own set of trainers that will help you learn those positions. All in all, to work at 911 takes about a year to get completely what we call released on all positions. So after you've been there for about a year, you can come in. We work 10-hour shifts. First 3 hours, you're call taken. The next 3 hours, you may be police dispatching. And then the next couple hours, you may be dispatching for the sheriff. So a chance, once you get fully trained, to do a little bit of everything. But this is the base mission for our call takers. And it's why we train folks on the phones first and foremost. And this is our primary job at 911. First and foremost is to find out as efficiently as possible what's going on, where it's at. And I'm going to give you another piece of advice should you ever have to call 911. Now, I've called 911 while working there, and I'm glad I had to, not so much for the reason, but because it reminded me that when you call 911, you're not always of your right mind. Now, I had worked at 911 for many years. The first time I actually called it, I was out to supper with my mom, and she went into a seizure. So I knew all the things that you're supposed to know because I've done the job. But as soon as I saw her and I called 911, I was blubbering and trying to talk over the operator, and I forgot all the stuff I thought I knew. Great lesson for me to get. So I want to remind folks, when you call 911, let the operator interrogate. What we tend to want to do when something horrible happens is, you're not going to, and we start going. But what you need to do is just kind of back off that if you can, and let the operator interrogate. They are trained to be extraordinarily efficient. Remember, their job is to get you help as quickly as possible. So let them ask their questions. So telephone interrogation is the most important part of the training that we do for our call takers, and they're just excellent at it. Call prioritization. If you come home from a long day and you find your house has been ransacked and burglarized, that's pretty awful. I mean, it's like one of the worst things that can happen to you. In the world of the 911 dispatcher, that's a priority 3 call. So it may not even be an immediate dispatch, to give you some idea. And it's difficult when somebody comes home and finds that scenario to explain to them what that means. I had a gentleman very upset once because he'd been waiting for a good period of time, and certainly deservedly so. But we had calls with injuries that were in progress, and those are your priority 1s and 2s, limited numbers of officers on each shift, and they were all busy. So he kept calling, and I kept trying to figure out a way to make him understand. And finally, anybody here ever watch MASH? Am I dating myself? Not as many. So I said, do you ever watch MASH? And fortunately, he did. And I said, you remember how when the chopper would come in and radar would see the chopper, and then they'd run out there and they'd start looking at people, and always the sucking chest wounds would go into the tents for operation, and everybody else would stay. That's what we've got going on here. It's triage. 911 is triage. So the most life-threatening things have to come first. And that doesn't mean that your call is not important, because it really is. And it eats us alive not being able to get those calls dispatched like this. But sometimes we can't. And that's call prioritization. We have to put those calls into a priority. Dispatch and resource allocation. You'd be surprised how much of this call takers and dispatchers are responsible for. For example, if there is a fugitive or someone that officers are looking for, it's up to the dispatcher to grab a map and set up a perimeter for officers to set up at. We also have to determine who we're going to send where and how much of whom we're going to send where. So there's a lot of that goes into this. Coordination of logistics, resource networking, and the transfer of medical calls. And I want to share this with you all about how we do that over here. And most 911 centers do it differently. Some of them actually do medical dispatching. We do not. We dispatch for police and fire agencies that I'll share in just a second. When we get a medical call, we do a 1-button transfer to either Cox or Mercy, depending upon where it is in the county. We give them just very briefly the chief complaint, the address, and the phone number, and then we terminate our end of the call. They take over. It sounds like it's burdensome. It isn't. It's very, very quick. And we also have a system built into where automatic fire responses are keyed by certain chief complaints. So a lot of times while we're talking to you on the phone, if someone with you is having a heart attack, fire is already on the way to you. So I didn't know when I first started at 911 that fire departments typically go more to medical calls than they do to fire calls. I didn't know that. That's one of the things I've learned over the years. They go to a lot more medical calls than they do fire calls. Okay. So what is 911? I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. I notice a lot of times when I go to these jargon-specific talks, people can get very much into the weeds. That's extraordinarily interesting to them, but not necessarily to me as an audience member. So I'm going to try to keep this light. We are a public safety answering point, or a PSAP, which is what each individual 911 center is known as. There are 185 of them covering 114 counties in the state of Missouri, which is pretty crazy. We are divided into regions statewide, and in our region 3, there are 18 primary PSAPs, and we are the PSAP for Greene County. So what that ultimately means is, if you are in Greene County anywhere, and you have an emergency of any type and you call 911, it should and likely will come to us. There are instances when it may not, and I'll get into those in just a bit. So if you ever hear the acronym PSAP or somebody talking about PSAP, I'm not sure why you would hear that, but if you ever do, now you'll know what that is. And like most industries, certainly on the law enforcement and first responder side, we are acronym crazy. When I was new, I would talk to officers who would speak to me solely in acronyms. And I thought, there's no way I'm ever going to understand what these people are telling me. And I'm sure you guys have some where you work too. All right, so who do we serve? We dispatch for a whole bunch of folks. And this slide gives you an idea of who those folks are, assuming that you can read it. We dispatch for 13 fire districts, and 9 law enforcement agencies. And as if that weren't enough, we also dispatch for animal control from the health department. Now, of all the different agencies that we dispatch for, most of them have similar, I'm trying to think of the right word, most of them we dispatch for in a similar fashion, but some of them don't. So a lot of times if you were a call taker and you get a call for Fairgrove Fire, what you do and how you react to what you're hearing might in fact be significantly different than how it would go for Springfield Fire. It makes for a very tricky learning process, and fire departments are known for changing their policies quite often. On the police and sheriff side, things are pretty universal on both those sides. We tend to do things relatively the same way. And as I mentioned, we do the one-button transfers for Mercy and Cox. Now, if everybody we dispatch for, who do you think causes the most citizen consternation? Citizens calling unhappy. Any guesses? Animal control every single time. I know those folks, they're hardworking, they're doing the absolute best they can, but people are pretty passionate about their animals. Anybody in here kind of one of those? I'm definitely one of those. I have 57 cats. That may be a slight exaggeration, but it feels like 57 every day. Yeah, people get upset, and a lot of times animal control can't respond. There may be an injured animal, they're not able to immediately respond, and it creates quite an uproar, as you can understand. I certainly understand that. And I think one of the most important things that I've sort of checked myself about, and I always remind our newer employees, is you take a number of these calls, as you might imagine. And over the course of years, you take a lot of these calls. And over the course of years, these calls all become very similar. What you have to guard against as a 911 employee is coming off as, I've heard this a million times before, I know how this story ends, because for each individual person, this is probably the first time they're experiencing it. And it's tricky. And now for those of you in here that deal with the public and you hear the same things from them over and over, check yourself. This is their first time. It's not necessarily yours, but it is theirs. Citizens are like kids. They know when you're mad, even when you're trying to hide it. And when you're talking to people in a vulnerable state or when they don't know necessarily what it is that they need, it's not a terrible thing to keep that in mind, and certainly true about the way we talk to folks at 911. Dispatchers may have taken a slew of very serious calls during an evening and then taken a call that's not even an emergency. How dare they call? Yeah, they dare, because we're for them too. So we constantly have to remind our folks, and I think it's a good reminder for all of us to deal with the public. Every time is a new time for them, and it may be the one time they get a chance to form an opinion of who we are as those that serve them, and I really have been governed by that over the years. Who else do we serve? Well, we don't directly dispatch for these folks, but we deal with them constantly, whether it's talking to them on the phone or enabling some sort of cooperative scenario between them and our folks. We work hand in hand with all of these agencies that you see on the screen and many, many more. So it's imperative upon us to know kind of how they operate too, and the parameters in which we could call and ask them for help, or vice versa. What hours are they available? What calls do they go on? How do they work? Who do we call? What's the number? There's a lot going on all the time. We also have tremendous cooperation with our surrounding county 911 agencies, which, as you can imagine, is pretty vital. One of the things I was going to mention just a bit ago is, and I'm going to get into a technology that we're getting ready to implement, we're super excited about, that's going to help us find you a little bit easier. Current technology is called wireless phase 2. And again, I'm staying out of the weeds here, but wireless phase 2 technology, and that's how we find you. It's changed over the years. When I was first at 911, if you called and you didn't know where you were and you couldn't give me some sort of way to find you on a map, good luck. But things have changed significantly. Now there's a triangulation that helps us find you by your device. One of those things, however, is still a cell tower. So let's say you're on the border of Greene and Christian counties. You're in Greene County. You call with an emergency. Very good chance you get bounced to a Christian County cell tower and routed to Christian County 911. Now, that's not a huge deal, but it is going to take a few minutes to get you back up here to Greene County. And I'll talk about our new technology that's going to knock that out here in just a minute. That's going to help us find you very, very much more specifically. We're super excited about it. Not going to get into detail about organizational structure, nothing quite unusual about it. You get an opportunity here to see the different positions that we have, but I won't spend a whole lot of time here. It's not that much different than most organizational structures. I will say that as the Director of Emergency Communications up top there, the Emergency Communications Senior Executive Secretary off to the side, she's the one that runs the show. Just a fact. When I was fresh out of college in the early 90s, I worked in commercial radio before I got into 911. The executive secretary there ran the station, and she has been my wife for 26 years. That's what you do. You find the person that runs the show, really runs the show, and doesn't need the credit to do it, and you found yourself a person. They surely have. All right, let's run into some stats here. So last year, these are our total stats for last year. We handled a total of 474,945 calls, and that's all calls, 911 and non-emergency calls. Just under 87% of them are from cell phones. We're almost to 90% now. This is kind of a wonky big deal for us because for those of us who have been doing it for a long time, we remember the first time, wait, this is a 911 call. We just got it on a cell phone. I remember that day when we got it on a cell phone. That's amazing. We get a lot of text to 911 calls. How many of you, show of hands, did not know you could text 911? Yes, you can text 911. And we prefer that you call us if you can. We get some better location info that way. However, texting 911 is outstanding, and you can probably come up with scenarios in your head, as I can come up with many, in which texting to 911 is a preferred method. Perhaps you're in a house, somebody's breaking in, you're trying to hide, could be a domestic situation. So we get a lot of text to 911 calls, and it works just like a regular text, minus the emojis. So text to 911, you just dial 911 and text to us. Over 7% of the calls we receive, which is a fairly significant number, are abandoned. And I'm going to use some vernacular here that may or may not be appropriate to use with a commissioner on board here for an actual Greene County event. Those, ladies and gentlemen, are butt dials. Those are those things when you do something and you look at your phone, you're like, I called 911, and you hang up immediately. That's what those are. 7% of the calls we get are accidental 911 calls. So I'm going to give you another piece of advice. If you do that, I've done it. Stay on the line. You're not in trouble. I swear to you, you're not in trouble. But we are required to make sure you're okay at that point. So if you hang up, we're going to start calling you. If we can't get a hold of you, we may try and find you. So you're not in trouble. I promise you, you're not in trouble. If you ever accidentally call 911, sorry, butt dial. I got it, no problem. We understand. It's all good. I promise you, it's not a big deal. Didn't think I'd ever use the word butt dial over here, but it's... Here are our CAD events. CAD is computer-aided dispatch, and these are the events that we actually enter into the computer for agencies, those agencies that I showed you to respond to. So Springfield Police Department makes up 52% of all our dispatched calls. They are by far the one that we get the most calls through. The Greene County Sheriff's Office makes up 18% of the calls that we receive. And again, I'm not talking about just calls that we receive, but rather calls that we receive that end up in a dispatch being done. Municipal law enforcement agencies, and we're talking about Republic and Ash Grove and Walnut Grove and all those different police departments across Greene County, make up 9% of our calls. All fire combined, Springfield and all the fire departments make up 8% of all our calls. Cox, 6%, and Mercy, 6%. So that stays pretty even. Here's a kind of a glance at the 911 operations room for those of you who haven't been over there. I will say right now, I'm super excited because we are doing a dramatic overhaul of our infrastructure over there right now. So all of the things that you see here, it looks pretty chaotic, that's all going to be gone, and we have beautiful new state-of-the-art furniture. We've got a new state-of-the-art training room that we're putting together. It is dramatic and remarkable and wonderful. I can't wait until it gets done. This is one of those deals where you're driving through the road construction and cursing it the entire time, and then 2 months later, you're like, this is a great road, right? Well, that's where we are right now. And while I get the opportunity, a tip of the cap to the commission for their support for us. They have helped in my time as director for us to really completely change the game over there. And none of that happens without that support. So we're eternally grateful for that. So we are funded by a standalone Greene County 911 tax. This is a 1/8 cent sales tax that voters passed roughly 75-25 back in 2007. And it funds all of our personnel, all of our operations, and all of our equipment. We don't use any general funds for either city or county. And here's where things get really tricky. We are city employees, City of Springfield employees over at Springfield Greene County 911. However, we reside in a county building. We're funded by a Greene County tax, and we also serve the citizens of Greene County. So it gets a little tricky sometimes. And when it comes to budget seasons for me, there's no end to my budget seasons because the city budget season is July to July. The county budget season is the fiscal year. So I am always trying to finagle some sort of budget scenario. I've been extraordinarily fortunate, and I understand how fortunate I've been that since I've been the director, our finances at 911, as is the case for most government entities, most, have been absolutely outstanding. It's this weird thing that's happened since the pandemic where sales taxes have gone way, way up, and we've been in excellent shape. And again, with the help of the commission, we have been able to use some of those excess dollars right back into the department to not only help our employees have a better place to work, but have better equipment and technology to help serve all of you and all of the citizens of Greene County even better. So a really exciting time to have been the director for sure. Greene County collects that tax. I don't want to get into deep detail about this, but just to kind of give you an idea how the city and county work together, the city invoices the county salary, benefits, everyday ops expenses, general liability insurance, phones at our backup location and allocated overhead. Okay. So that'll just kind of give you an idea. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but suffice to say that the tax has been phenomenal and it was much needed. And when it was passed, we were in trouble, as a lot of people were at that time. So the opportunity to get that tax dedicated for 911 has made an enormous difference in everything that we do. I told you a little bit about the budget seasons and how they never end. In 2022, our actual budget was just over $7 million. 72% of that went to personnel, 28% to ops and equipment. We've got more pay raises that have come through via the city that we're super excited about. And for me, anything I can do to enhance the job for those 911 telecommunicators, I have got to be absolutely tenacious about doing because it's a brutally tough gig. Our turnover is extraordinary, as you might imagine. And so it's my job. I can't impact the work, but it's my job to do every single thing I can to relentlessly advocate for our folks and to make it a better place for them to work. And that's what gets me to work and keeps me there every single day, at least until July. So again, when you think you might need us, please call us, know your location, and let us take over. If you don't know your location, chances are much better these days we can find you, and you don't always know your location. But I always tell people, start to take stock of where you are. Since I've worked at 911, if I'm on the interstate, I pay more attention to the mile markers that I pass. If I'm in a theater, first thing I do is look for a exit. Like all the little things. I don't go crazy with it, but I'm a little bit more situationally aware. The thing that most of us just aren't, because we're living our lives. So don't go nuts with it, but be situationally aware. It will definitely help should anything ever happen. Hopefully it won't. Don't hang up until we tell you, and don't assume we know what is happening. Our technology is fantastic, but we can't see what you see, at least not yet. And I do want to end, I think, with this slide. I've got a couple more, but I want to end with this one. We are extraordinarily excited in the 911 industry, and particularly at Springfield Greene County, to soon be unleashing next generation 911 technology. We are in the process of upgrading to this, and let me give you a little taste of what this is going to mean for the average citizen calling 911. We will be able to trace your location directly to your device, period. We're going to be able to find you on the X and Y axis. If you are at the 7th floor of a building on the far east side, we're going to see that immediately. There'll be no more cell phone towers. It'll be directly to you on the XY axis, and we'll get your location as the phone is ringing. So we're going to know right where you are. Next generation 911 technology will also enable citizens to send us real-time video and photos. And you think in terms of Haley Owens. I hate to think in terms of Haley Owens. But fortunately, a citizen was able to get us the license plate information. Can you imagine with next generation 911 technology, a snapshot of the license plate and a video of the suspect? We'll have all that in real time and have the ability to get that out to our folks immediately. So this will change old 1950s era copper wire technology, which is what we use to carry your calls now, to an IP-based system with deep redundancy built in, meaning that if part of it goes down, another part will come up. If that goes down, another part will come up, and so on and so on. Because if it's just internet, y'all know how that works. 911, that's down again. So a lot of redundancy built into this. This is the crowning achievement of, it's not my achievement, but it's the crowning achievement for the industry in my career. I have seen from the very beginning, we didn't know where you were and couldn't find you, to we've got a much better way to find you, to we know exactly where you are, send me a selfie. I'm making that part. I don't want a selfie. And that's next generation 911. I would be delighted to answer any questions that any of you might have. So feel free. Anybody? Yeah.
So with like Life 360 technology, how does that come through to you guys?
It typically comes through a separate call center or a separate monitoring station, and it will come directly from them to us.
Does it send you like the location?
Most usually, yes. And here's a sad fact. I read a recent story about a 911 agency that didn't have very good location technology out east, but an Uber driver did have excellent technology. So he was able to call 911, and using his technology, he was able to help that 911 center find a person. So 911 centers tend to lag behind. But yes, most of the agencies that serve 911 are far ahead when it comes to that sort of technology. Yeah, it's a great question, though. Not many at all, really. Just a handful a year, I'd say. Not as many as you might think. Other questions? Yes.
How many dispatchers do you have on shift at a time?
Great question. We are funded for 84. We have never, ever been fully staffed. We're getting closer. We're getting close to like single-digit vacancies, which is very exciting for us. On any given shift, you will find anywhere from 11 to 15 folks on shift, depending upon the time of day. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, you're going to have more folks at PM. You're going to have more folks on duty than you would have, say, at 4 a.m. You're going to have more folks on duty when the bars close, which you might be surprised to hear. 911 calls rise significantly when the bars close. And we have a lot of folks that are on duty at that time. Seasonally, things are interesting too. As we get into cold weather, 911 calls start to taper. Not big time like they used to, but they do. And as the warm weather starts to kick in, here come the 911 calls, which frankly, nonstop warm weather and 911 pretty much explains the strangeness that is Florida. Things get a little wacky around here when it gets warmer, and 911 calls tend to pick up and get strange, and Florida's warm all the time. So, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Personality / and training is best for a dispatcher.
So glad you asked that question. So glad you asked that question. We are recruiting hard, and the type of person that works at 911, while it is a public safety gig, is pretty different than folks that become firefighters or police officers. Big reason for that is think about little kids. Think about like a 4 and 5-year-old out in the yard playing with the little fake badge, the little holster, the little fire helmet. I've still not seen the kid with the little headset. I've not seen it. So as a result, we tend to get people at 911 that have never done anything like this before. I was in commercial radio before I did this. I fell into it because I needed money and benefits. I was making $7,000 a year and I had no benefits. I needed something. My dad once said government work is good. I fell into it. That's the story of most of our folks. But we have found over the years that the kind of folks that really succeed, here's a story. Buddy, a young kid. I used to go to Pita Pit on West Republic. You guys remember when that was out there? I think it's a Thai place now. And there was this kid behind the counter. Had his headset on. He was working the drive-thru. He was making pitas. He was talking to customers, big smile on his face. He was a multitasking fiend. And I thought, man, I got to get this kid. So I recruited him. Just a couple months ago, he was named Missouri's 911 Telecommunicator of the Year. So that's the kind of folks that we look for. Multitaskers, folks that can do a bunch of stuff at once, folks that eat stress for lunch. They're not necessarily set aside by it. I mean, sure, they're affected by it. We're all humans. But people that can get through it, get over it, that kind of person is who we're looking for. So I always tell people, if there's a drive-through that you frequent and there's somebody there that really impresses you with all that they do, send them my way. They usually make great dispatchers. Other questions before we wrap? Yes, ma'am.
What do you do to help with the stress of the job?
Also glad you asked that question. We have a brand new, I say brand new, it's about a year old, a fully functional with all kinds of great equipment gym for employees. It's an amazing gym. It's like a health club quality gym. I'm a yoga instructor, so I run yoga classes for my folks 2-3 times a week. We do breathing exercises, stuff like that. We have a peer support team that's made up of dispatchers, supervisors, newer employees, older employees who have specific training to the sorts of critical incident stress that our folks go through. That way they have the opportunity to sit down with a coworker if they need to privately and confidentially to talk about that. We have an EAP program. So that's the sort of stuff that we offer, exercise, peer support. And honestly, the thing I always found when I was on the floor that was most helpful is just being able to sit with somebody who's shoulder before and they can talk to you about what it was like for them. So peer support's a big part of what we do. Big part. And we've got the peer support team that we have will oftentimes send out to adjoining counties for their 911 to use because they don't have staffing or very much money, some of them, and they need that same peer support. So we'll send our peer support team out to help them too. Let's see another hand up over here. Ma'am.
Is the non-emergency line used?
Yeah, it actually is. Most of the time, non-emergency lines are used by people who aren't sure what line they're supposed to call. And a lot of times, non-emergency lines are 911 type scenarios. But most non-emergency calls we get are from other agencies and, stuff like that, interagency type stuff. But I would say that if you're not sure if you should call 911, call it. Absolutely. Err on that side every time. Sir.
I think that was all the questions. Did anybody else have another one? Kris, we want to thank you for the presentation this morning, but we want to especially thank you for all of your service over the years.
Thank you.
And we want to congratulate you on your retirement, and we want to let you know that you're going to be very missed.
Thank you very
Don't
much.
be a stranger.
I promise I won't. I'll still be in Springfield, so I'll be.
Thank you for
Thank you. Thank you all very much.